Welcome to Truth by Billie Beene. Update, March 9, 2026, time in Texas, about 7 a.m. Some of the things we'll cover: the Strait of Hormuz and its impact being closed on U.S. and European banks, President Trump, and what's up with Nato. The U.S. military continues to prep, likely for a 1-2 punch to Iran. And there are rumors that Israel has plans to nuke Iran. But I wouldn't let that startle you too much. The U.S. military has had Israel's nukes under guard for years. And there's plenty of U.S. military in Israel right now. So we're hearing from Tucker Carlson rumors Israel is to nuke Iran. Now, this rumor could have some legs in that U.S. intel reported, I believe Tuesday, that 15 planes had taken off from Israel carrying Israeli government. And we have this. Iran now is saying the ceasefire has been broken by Israel hitting Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iran's proxy. And so Iran is not going to engage in Friday talks. I suspect that Iran, there are, even among the psychopaths, enough thinking that they will come to the Friday talks. Supposedly between J.D. Vance, I believe, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. We have no clue who is representing Iran because it's unknown who is in charge of Iran. So that's going on. And we know that Iran has already broken the ceasefire by hitting Israel and its Gulf states neighbors. There was no stopping Iran in the missiles and drones it was launching. So we had the ceasefire begin Tuesday night about 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Iran never stopped launching missiles and drones on both Israel and its Gulf states neighbors. Tuesday night, all day Wednesday, Wednesday night. So the only party that appears to be observing the ceasefire is the U.S. And we have this from Gateway Pundit that, we had a church hit in Houston, Texas. That happened really about March 15. It's just coming out now. It was the downtown church, Eden Church. And we had a 23-year-old male named E. Mowawi who came in with several weapons, 100 rounds, and allegedly on his social media it posted he wanted to kill the pastor. The armed security guard and other armed church members took him down. He's been arrested. We have this from New York Prepper that, Iran has not recognized nor engaged in a ceasefire, and that the U.S. military has taken down Iran's missiles and drone supply and their manufacturing. But we continue to hear that Russia and China are resupplying via the Caspian Sea and also Pakistan. And we have this from U.S. Intel. So this is Thursday. Last night, Wednesday night, no ceasefire. Iran hit Kuwait with 28 drones, and there's no recognition of the ceasefire. There's no reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Israel also continued to hit the Iran's Hezbollah proxy in Lebanon. Iran also hit the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia yesterday. So clearly, Iran is not observing the ceasefire. And we have that Iran reports that an Iranian refinery was hit on the island of Lavon by, I believe that was the UAE. And all night, the U.S. military, So I've been putting out that during this ceasefire, which began Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that the U.S. continued to prep. They moved Wednesday additional Marines from San Diego to the Middle East. And we have new information from U.S. Intel that all night, Tuesday and Wednesday and continuing, the U.S. has sent plane after plane after plane from CONT'S, the continental U.S., to Europe. So that's going on. So we see the U.S. also Wednesday in the Middle East, near the Strait of Hormuz, along the southern Iranian border. We had the USS Tripoli, Marines, and also in the air growlers to take out radars located along the southern border of Iran near the Strait of Hormuz. And we have this, April 8, yesterday, in the UAE, their Habs Han gas facility was hit. Iran also hit yesterday 3 Kuwait power plants and also a desalination unit, and also hit Saudi Arabia pumping station. And last night oil went down 21%. That had to do with the ceasefire, bringing down the price of oil per barrel. And we have this Wednesday. President Trump met with the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, formerly a leader of Netherlands. And Mark Rutte is trying to keep the U.S. in NATO and says that most of the nations in NATO supported the U.S. Well, I submit this. The most of the nations that supported the U.S. hitting Iran were the NATO nations where U.S. military bases were not located. Most of the NATO nations where U.S. military bases were located tried directly to thwart the U.S. in their hit on Iran. And now we have a Christian prophet supporting also the U.S. hit on Iran. And we saw the UK, Spain, Italy, France saying to the U.S., you can't use the U.S. bases that are located here to launch planes to hit Iran, which resulted in the U.S. military launching planes from the U.S. 18 times in 30-hour missions to hit Iran. And I've got this to say to NATO, shut up. And I'm the average American citizen, and the average American citizen believes that the U.S. needs to get out of all international organizations. The UN, the WHO, the NATO, IMF, and so forth. And we have this. Mark Rutte. Well, most of the NATO nations supported America. That's the ones that didn't have U.S. military bases. And also, so Mark Rutte, he met with President Trump yesterday, Wednesday. They're supposed to have another meeting today, Wednesday. President Trump put out that he's going to begin pulling troops from Europe. He just doesn't know the starting point, but it's either going to be Spain or Germany. Germany also did not support the U.S. in our hit on Iran. And the primary reason to hit Iran is, as Iran itself, during a talk with the U.S., admitted they had enough enriched uranium to produce up to 10 to 12 nuclear bombs. Iran. Why in the world would you admit that to the U.S. when you knew the U.S. has consistently said for decades that Iran cannot have a nuke? But that happened. And now we have this. What's up with shipping? Yeah, nothing's going through the Strait of Hormuz. And part of the agreement for the ceasefire by the U.S. was that Iran was to immediately and freely open the strait so ships can pass through. But as I said, the U.S. military, beginning Tuesday night, had plane after plane after plane going to Europe to set up and then take those troops and equipment to the Middle East. So the U.S. is using this ceasefire time to prep. And we have this also from U.S. Intel. Now, there's been a major global effect of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, plus Iran hitting the oil and gas facilities in its Gulf states neighbors, which has dramatically dropped the income for the Gulf states neighbors that goes to both U.S. and European banks. Now, yesterday, the Federal Reserve at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time called for an emergency meeting at 2 p.m. with regard to cutting rates and also liquidity injection. And we have the Gulf states cash flow has dramatically been down since February 28, and on an average day, the Gulf states export $1.2 to $1.6 billion worth of oil and LNG and so on. Well, they haven't been doing that since February 28. So the cash flow for the Gulf states is dramatically down. Typically, the Gulf states would be depositing money in U.S. and European banks. Now, there's a severe liquidity problem in the European banks, which is also going to impact U.S. banks. And we have this. We also have now that the Gulf states are going to begin withdrawing cash from the European banks and U.S. banks, which is creating a liquidity problem in both U.S. and European banks. And also, this cuts down the Gulf states are also going to sell U.S. Treasury bonds, which will directly impact U.S. banks. So that's going on. And yesterday, European banks were crying to the Federal Reserve in the U.S. for help. The U.S. banks told the Fed, it's not looking good unless the U.S. helps the European banks. These are the same European nations who said no to the U.S. in helping the U.S. in their military effort against Iran. So we should say to the European banks, shut up. And also, there's going to be a meeting of the Bilderberg group in Washington, D.C., beginning today, April 9 through 12. And some of those attending includes the Prime Minister of Denmark, the head of Spain's bank, and these are the same governments and banks who are asking for U.S. help now. It's good that our president absolutely can remain resolute. Another attendee for the Bilderberg group will be the IMF, also the U.S. Trade Representative Jamie Greer. We have a Sweden Minister of Defense, Paul Johnson. We have a CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp. We have the U.S. government Department, Science and Technology, Michael Kradlos. France has their Minister of Finance attending. And how could any meeting be complete with representatives from Europe if it did not include Ursula von der Leyen? So yeah, that's going on. They're here to ask for money. We need money. We have this from the China Observer. So the ceasefire is questionable in Iran. And we see in Iran that they learned a tactic from the CCP in using human shields, especially young people. Come out and be a martyr for Iran. But hey, back in January, this same government was telling parents to keep their young people at home or they would be shot dead in the streets of Iran. You don't get it both ways. But it's coming out that China began using human shields all the way back to 1947, 1948, especially when the CCP fought the KMT. They used human shields, and China, it appears, is the #1 supplier now to Iran of intel, also chemicals to make missile fuel, and so forth. And Russia also is supplying Iran, as is Pakistan. Those Chinese supplies go through Pakistan. Don't tell me that the government of Pakistan doesn't know that China is resupplying Iran to fight against the U.S. And those supplies are coming through Pakistan. Yeah. So we have a Christian prophet many are familiar with, Dutch Sheets, who's saying he agrees 100% with the U.S. hitting Iran, that Iran could not be allowed to get a nuke, that it would, nuke the U.S. and Israel. And we see Iran also now blackmailing the world through its closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And Dutch Sheets says, and I agree 100%, the only way to deal with Hitlers is to destroy them. So way to go, Dutch Sheets, prophet of God. So it's good to be in prayer for America, President Trump, the U.S. military, and world peace. I love you, and I'll see you soon.